Today, I will be ranking every NFL team as it stands today before the NFL draft. Obviously, things could change as we get into August and right before the season begins. But as of right now, this is where I see things shaking out. We have the S through D tier type of tier list. Pretty straightforward. The best teams in S tier, worst teams in the D tier. Before I get started, a friendly reminder, if you are new to the channel, be sure to subscribe. Drop a like on the video if you do enjoy it. And the first team we have up is the Tennessee Titans, and they are a very interesting team heading into 2023. They dealt with a lot of injuries last year, especially at the quarterback position. Ryan Tannehill missed most of the season. Malik Willis was not as good as they thought he was going to be right away, and Josh Dobbs ended up ending the season for them, but they didn't make the playoffs, which was kind of expected for them to do last year in the AFC South. I think next year they're going to be a solid team again. There's been some rumors with them kind of rebuilding, trying to get off of Ryan Tannehill's contract, maybe trading away Derrick Henry. I think they're a pretty solid B tier team. That's where we're going to have them placed. I think they're going to be a competent team next year. I don't know if I see them as a playoff team, but I do not see them as a bottom of the barrel team either. And I'm not going to do this in any particular order, just going from the teams left to right. So that means the Miami Dolphins are up next, our first AFC East team. And I'm actually going to put the Dolphins in A tier. They made a ton of moves this offseason, including Jalen Ramsey, getting him for a third-round pick, and Hunter Long. They're bringing back Tyreek Hill and Jalen Waddle, year 2 of Tua and Mike McDaniel's offense. I think the Dolphins have a great chance to win a playoff game or two, maybe be a potential Super Bowl contender, but I'm not ready to put them in that type of tier yet, in the S tier, solely because of the lack of experience in the postseason. So I think the A tier fits them pretty nicely at this point. But up next is the New York Jets, our second AFC East team, and I'm actually going to place them just a little bit ahead of the Titans. I think the Jets are going to have a really solid defense next year. Once again, it was one of the best in the league this past year. Where I disagree with some people is I do not think Aaron Rodgers puts them over the top as one of the best teams in the league. I don't really think that situation is going to work out well for the Jets. Aaron Rodgers brings a ton of drama with them. They haven't been able to find a package that they agree on between the Jets and the Packers to trade for Rodgers. How long is it going to be before Rodgers is even working out with the team, being in the facility? I think that messes up their chemistry in year number 1. I could see them as a potential wild card team, but nothing more than that. I think it's kind of hard at this point to see them winning a playoff game, in my opinion. So I do think they're one of the better teams in the B tier. But as far as reaching that A ceiling, I don't see that as I'm making this video. The Cincinnati Bengals, pretty straightforward. They are an S tier team, have made the AFC Championship game back-to-back years. Of course, made the Super Bowl 2 years ago. Bringing back all their core pieces. Joe Burrow, once again, one of the best quarterbacks in the league. They're going to be a powerhouse again next year. I see them winning the AFC North for the 3rd straight season. And the Bengals, pretty clearly S tier. The Cleveland Browns, they're interesting as well. I think they have some good talent on their team, but I'm going to place them in B tier between the Jets and the Titans. I think they have more talent, more higher of a ceiling than the Titans, but I do think the Jets have just a little bit more stability. I think the Jets should be a little bit better next season. It all really depends on Deshaun Watson. How is he going to bounce back after a pretty mediocre first season with the Browns? I get that he didn't really play for 2 years. He was still kind of getting the rust off, so I'm taking that into account, but I'm not too sure if he's ever going to return to that form where he was with the Texans, where he was one of the best quarterbacks in the league. We'll have to see how he bounces back this year, but I think right now the Browns are looking like an 8-9 win team competing for a wild card, similar to the Jets. I just think the Jets have a better defense, and when there's questions about both teams and their quarterbacks, I'm going to tend to side with the better defense. That's the Jets. Up next is the Jacksonville Jaguars, and they had a great season last year, winning the first playoff game in multiple years. Doug Peterson, year number 2 with Trevor Lawrence, I think he's going to take another step up, who may already be their best quarterback in franchise history. Calvin Ridley, he's coming over from the Falcons. I think the Jags are an A-tier team. I see them competing for another playoff win or 2 next season. They've competed with the Chiefs for a good portion of the game. Didn't really have the firepower to actually win that game at Arrowhead. But I think next year with Calvin Ridley, another draft under their belt, they're going to be a really good team next year. A tier for me. The Detroit Lions are a very, very interesting team next year. I think for right now, I'm actually going to have them as the best team in B tier. I'm going to have them slightly ahead of the Jets. I really like what they did last season, especially towards the later half of the year. They really got things going. Their defense started playing a little bit better because their offense was a powerhouse basically throughout the entirety of the season. And they're bringing back all those pieces. Their offensive line is still one of the best in the league. They have their offensive coordinator returning. Jared Goff had a great season last year. I think he continues to play at a high level. They did lose Jamal Williams, who led the league in touchdowns last year, but Jameson Williams, he'll be able to start from week 1. He had kind of a full season to kind of learn the offense, learn what it's like to play in the NFL. He got a few snaps towards the end of the year, so they're going to have some good weapons now on the outside with him and Amon-Ra St. Brown. They really brought in some resources to help out their defense. I think they drafted another top defender with their 6th pick in the draft. They're going to be a really good team next year. I think they can win the NFC North. But right now, I do think they're slightly worse than the Dolphins and Jags just because both of those teams made the playoffs last year. I need to see it for the Lions consistently because they routinely have a great year, then kind of have a down year. They're not very consistent. So I think for right now, top of the B tier for me with the talent and the expectations going into next year, works for me for the Lions. The Minnesota Vikings, I'm a little bit lower on than I feel like most people are going into this season. I'm going to have them right behind the Browns, but ahead of the Titans on my B tier. They had a great season last year, but they did play a lot of weaker teams. They did win a lot of one-possession games, which is kind of a luck stat. You don't always go 9-0 or whatever their crazy number was in one-possession games. That's not going to happen again next year. It's going to kind of result to the mean a little bit. So I do think they're going to lose some more of those close ball games, which is going to have them kind of come down a little bit from their amazing start to the season last year. On offense, they're kind of Justin Jefferson centric. Adam Thielen is gone. They really need a wide receiver too. I think maybe that's who they draft in the first round of this draft. Their defense still has a lot of holes. I did like Brian Flores, the hire, to bring him in as their new defensive coordinator. I think he'll do an excellent job there, but he also needs some pieces to work with. And I still think the Vikings have a lot of talent they need to get on their defense. And I just see them taking a step back from this past year. Kirk Cousins, solid quarterback. He's not going to mask all the flaws on your team. I think for right now, the Vikings are 8 to 10 win team, depending on how the luck falls for them. But I think right now, I would take the Lions, Jets, and Browns over them if they matched up tomorrow. Now, the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, they're going to be our first C-tier team. I like the talent they have on their team. They have some good players. Vita Vea, Levante David, Devin White, maybe he doesn't get traded, maybe he stays. They have some nice pieces all across their defense. Offense, of course, Mike Evans, Chris Godwin. They have some good pieces, but I'm not a big fan of Todd Bowles. I do not know if he can be the head coach and the sole leader of a really good team. So I think the Bucs kind of take a step back this year. Of course, now they don't really have a quarterback. Tom Brady, the GOAT, retired. Baker Mayfield, Kyle Trask, a rookie. Who's going to be their starter? Maybe they go after Will Levis in the draft. Maybe they start Baker Mayfield all year, punt the season kind of, but I think they're a little bit too talented to get a top pick in next year's draft. So ultimately, I see the Bucs in this kind of lower mid-tier range, and I think this kind of fits with kind of their quarterback and head coach situation. The 49ers, just like the Bengals, pretty simple. S-tier team. I think they're going to be amazing again next year. Javon Hargrave to kind of bolster up their pass rush even more. They do have some questions about the quarterback position. Brock Purdy, Trey Lance, Sam Darnold, who's going to play? Who's going to start week one? There's been some rumblings. Maybe Trey Lance is going to get traded. Is Brock Purdy going to be ready for week one? I don't know. We don't really know that yet. But I think as we get later into the season, those questions will be answered. They'll be resolved. And I think in the meantime, the running game for the 49ers with Kyle Shanahan calling the plays, designing the offense, and their stellar defense with now Steve Wilkes calling the shots instead of D'Amico Ryans, I think they're still going to be fine. Still going to get off to a good start. 49ers, easy S tier. Easily one of the best teams in the NFC, which is kind of a weaker conference, but an S-tier team for sure. The Atlanta Falcons, I see pretty much in the same light as the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, just less overall talent. I know they went out and got a lot of pieces for their defense in the offseason, but overall, I still think they have a lot of flaws on that side of the ball. Maybe they got to get another pass rusher in the draft, maybe a guy to help out AJ Terrell in the secondary. And then on offense, there's still a lot of questions. Desmond Ridder, he's likely going to be their quarterback one. I'm not super high on Desmond Ridder. I thought he was okay last year as a rookie, showed some promise. Other times he didn't really show like he could be a top echelon franchise quarterback. But we'll see if he can take his jump in year number 2 with Arthur Smith. And as far as the pass catchers go, Drake London, Kyle Pitts, they're solid. I would like to see them use Kyle Pitts a little bit more this year. They did not utilize him a lot last year. I did have him in fantasy football, so that dearly did hurt me last year. But I think next year the Falcons can again be a 5 to 7 win team next year, similar to what they were last year. I don't see them drastically improving from that, but we'll see how things go. Maybe Ridder takes a huge jump up, makes them into a potential wild card team in a weak NFC. But I think for right now, this is fair. Just a little bit behind the Bucs, who have more talent than them, but they're kind of in the same range. And that brings us to the Baltimore Ravens, who have had a lot of drama this offseason as well with Lamar Jackson. I think they're still an A-tier team. I think I would still take the Jaguars and Dolphins over the Ravens just because of those concerns with Lamar. They went out and got Odell Beckham Jr. That was a cool signing. We'll see if he can bounce back off of 2 ACL injuries. But are you going to get a contract done with Lamar? And if you don't, is he going to apply on the franchise tag? Is he going to sit out? Is he going to do what Le'Veon Bell did? I have some concerns about that. So I'm not too sure right now in the Ravens. I still think overall their talent and coaching puts them in the A tier. But I'm still a little bit concerned about Lamar Jackson, which is why I would have him behind these teams. And if Lamar sits out or there's more drama heading into training camp, I could easily slide them into B tier and have teams like the Lions or Jets potentially being ahead of them. The Chicago Bears are next, and I'm going to put them right in between the Bucs and the Falcons. I think last year they were a little bit unlucky as far as one possession games went. Like I said about the Vikings, who were very lucky in that aspect last year, the Bears were super unlucky, which basically got them the number 1 overall pick. I do not think the Bears were the worst team in the league last year, but I don't see them being a potential wild card competing team next year either. I think C tier is a pretty good range for them. 5 to 7 wins, maybe 8 if they're lucky and Justin Fields takes a massive leap. I think they're going to have a solid season next year. I really like their trade back with the Panthers getting more capital to help build that roster out. But I do not think this team is ready right now to compete for the playoffs or the NFC North. Our first NFC East team, the Dallas Cowboys, I'm going to have them ahead of both the Jags and the Ravens, but behind the Miami Dolphins. I really liked a lot of the moves that the Cowboys made in free agency. Stephon Gilmore, Brandon Cooks were basically pennies on the dollar. The one thing I will say I'm concerned with is getting rid of Kellen Moore. Mike McCarthy is going to be calling plays now. I'm not a huge fan of McCarthy. I think he had a couple good years with the Packers and Aaron Rodgers, but how hard is it really to be, the offensive coordinator for a Hall of Fame quarterback? Not super hard. So I'm going to be paying close attention to Mike McCarthy, see how his offense is performing, see what he's calling in crunch situations. But I think right now, overall, the talent that the Cowboys have, they're going to be a team again next year that can win multiple playoff games. And hey, if Dak Prescott returns to his form that he was a couple years ago, and the new players that they bring in have stellar seasons, I could see the Cowboys being a Super Bowl contender. But for right now, I'm going to hold off on that, have them with the Dolphins kind of leading that clubhouse in the A tier, and we'll see where things go from there. And maybe the Cowboys can jump up as we get into August. Maybe I'll do this again, put them a little bit higher. But for right now, I think this spot is perfect for the Cowboys. The Houston Texans are our first D-tier team. There's not really much to say about them. They're in rebuild mode. I don't think they're going to draft a quarterback now in the draft with Bryce Young ultimately going to the Panthers with the number 1 overall pick. I think they're going to punt this year, go for Caleb Williams or Drake May in 2024. And I think that's what we're going to see on the field this year. I really like the hire of DeMeco Ryans. He's a great defensive coach. He's a good leader. He played for the Texans. He's kind of returning there. It's kind of like a homecoming. It's a really nice story, but I do not think he's going to be successful in year 1 with this talent on the roster. And with the Texans probably not drafting a quarterback this year, or at least not getting the guy that they wanted in Bryce Young, I think there's a good chance that they punt this year, look towards next year, and ultimately they're going to be one of the worst teams in the league. And you can practically just copy and paste exactly what I just said for the Texans and put it together for the Colts. It's the exact same scenario. Colts have a new coach, Shane Steichen from the Eagles. I like the hire. I think he did wonders with Jalen Hurts. Maybe you can do that with Anthony Richardson, who the Colts could potentially draft with the number 4 overall pick. That's who I want the Colts to draft. I think he would be a really nice fit there. The Colts have been successful with quarterbacks, Peyton Manning, Andrew Luck. Seems like every single quarterback that they take early in the first round turns out to be a huge hit. We'll see if Anthony Richardson or whoever they draft can end up being that. But if they do draft Richardson, he's going to need some time to develop. I think they have some okay talent on offense. I think they need some more playmakers, but I think Jonathan Taylor, Michael Pittman are a good start. And I think overall, they're going to be one of the worst teams in the league again next year. And the Texans and the Colts may be fighting for maybe the number 1 overall pick next year. The Los Angeles Rams may be the hardest team to rank on this list for me. I'm going to put them in B tier, behind the Titans, behind all those other teams on the B list, but ahead of those teams in C tier only because I'm believing in Sean McVay and Matthew Stafford revitalizing what they did in the Super Bowl 2 years ago. They were ravaged by injuries last year. I know that they traded away Jalen Ramsey. I know that they just traded away Allen Robinson, but they still have Aaron Donald. They still have Cooper Kupp. For now, I guess maybe they'll end up trading one of those guys or both of them. And they still have Matthew Stafford. They still have one of the best coaches in the league, Sean McVay. I think they're going to figure it out. They recouped a lot of draft picks. They're going to have a lot of young players next year. Maybe some of them do really well, like the Seahawks had a lot of rookies do really well for them last year. Maybe the Rams draft pretty good. They have that sort of collection of young players like the Seahawks did. We'll see what happens. And let me know in the comments where you would put them. I could honestly be talked into having them in C tier. I think they're still better than the teams in the D tier. I do not see the Rams being one of the worst teams again next year. That's with decent health, of course. If Matthew Stafford and Cooper Kupp miss the entire season like they did last year, obviously they'll be one of the worst teams again. But I think if they are healthy, they play most of the season, I think the Rams can be a team that wins 8-9 games, maybe. Maybe I'm pushing a little bit. Maybe I'll change my mind down the road. But I think for right now, just banking on the health of those guys and returning to where they were playing 2 years ago, I still think the Rams can be a competent team. I don't know if they're going to make the playoffs. The NFC is pretty weak. Maybe they can compete for a wild card spot. But I think this is a pretty good range for them. I think the lowest I would have them is in the C tier, probably ahead or around where the Bucks and the Bears are. But I think for right now, this is where I would place them with all the things that have been going on with the Rams the past season. The Los Angeles Chargers were a really interesting team last year. They started off kind of slow, got hot late, and then they made the playoffs, had a huge choke job against the Jaguars. I think next year they're going to be another playoff caliber team. I'm going to place them for right now behind the Ravens. But if Lamar Jackson has some more drama, I will change that. I will have the Chargers ahead of the Ravens. But I think for right now, the Jaguars deserve to be ahead of them. The Jaguars, did come back down 27 points to defeat them. They played terrible in the first half, still won that game. I think the Jaguars could beat them again next season. But I still think the Chargers are in that range of a team that could win a playoff game next year, maybe win 2 playoff games next year. They still have Justin Herbert, who's a really good quarterback. Kellen Moore's coming in. Maybe he can make a system that utilizes his strengths a little bit more, because we know it was a huge talking point and a huge controversy regarding Justin Herbert's season last year, that they didn't have an offensive coordinator who utilized him correctly. They also dealt with a ton of injuries last year. They seem like they do every single year. Maybe they get a little bit more healthy next year. Maybe they get another wide receiver in the draft, Zay Flowers. I see him a lot mocked to the Chargers. Pair him with Keenan Allen, Mike Williams. So I think for right now, this is a pretty good spot to have him. But maybe, just maybe, if the Ravens have a little bit more drama, I'll place them ahead of the Ravens. But for now, this is what I like. The Raiders, I'm going to have them leading the clubhouse in C tier. I think they still have a lot of good talent, especially on offense. Devontae Adams, Josh Jacobs. They got rid of Darren Waller, but they still have Hunter Renfrow. They brought in Jimmy G, who's kind of, in the same tier of Derek Carr. Not a huge upgrade or downgrade there, depending on how you view both those guys. So I still think their offense is going to be dynamic. I do think they need to help out Max Crosby on the defensive side of the ball a little bit more. And I am pretty confident that their first 2 picks in the draft will be on defense. So I do think their unit will be a little bit better next year. But overall, I still have a lot of questions about Josh McDaniels as a head coach. I'm still not super high on their quarterback and Jimmy G. And their defense is still going to be pretty mid, if that. So I still think the Raiders have a lot of work to do, which is why I put them in C tier. But just because of their offensive playmaking ability, I'd have them in the C tier ahead of the Bucks, but still not capable of being a very competitive team throughout the entirety of this season. The Washington Commanders, another C tier team for me. They got a really good defense, but the quarterback one next year is going to be Sam Howell. How is that going to play out? Is he really the quarterback of the future? We'll have to wait and see how he performs next year. I think Washington could be a player for one of the top quarterbacks next year, kind of help with their new reset as a franchise and organization. Dan Snyder is now out. He is selling the team, so they're going to have a new owner. Maybe they start with a new coaching staff as well next season. It'll be really interesting. I'm excited for Washington fans to finally get rid of Dan Snyder, have a new kind of regime, new type of culture in the building. Things are looking up in Washington. I still think they have a lot of good talent on defense and offense, but just because of the uncertainty of the quarterback position, kind of a new culture coming in, I'm not too sure how great they're going to be next year. But I think in the future, Washington has a chance to really be a team on the rise. Kansas City, pretty simple S-tier team. Won the Super Bowl last year. I think they're going to be another good team again next year. They've routinely been the number 1 or 2 seed with Patrick Mahomes his entire career. I don't see that changing next year. I still think they're going to be a really good team. They have a lot of draft capital again. Maybe they go out and trade for DeAndre Hopkins. But overall, the fact that they have Patrick Mahomes, they're bringing back majority of the Super Bowl roster. Andy Reid is still coaching. There's not really much debate here. Chiefs easy S tier. We're moving on to the next one. The New Orleans Saints are another really interesting team. I'm actually going to slide them in right here in B tier between the Jets and the Browns. I think the Browns and the Saints are very, very close. The Saints went out and got our franchise quarterback in Derek Carr. Last year, they still had some good weapons. Chris Olave really emerged onto the scene. Michael Thomas will be back this year. Alvin Kamara will be back this year. And their defense is still really solid. Dennis Allen is a great defensive play caller. They also have a first-round pick in the Sean Payton trade. Probably get another pass rusher or a guy to help out in their secondary. Right now, in my opinion, I do think the Saints are the leader to win the NFC South. It's a pretty weak division, as I've already stated, with multiple teams in the C tier. And it is pretty likely, in my opinion, right now, that the Saints do host a playoff game next year, which seems crazy. But, of course, if you win your division, you host a playoff game. I could see that definitely happening for the Saints next year. Gotta see them winning one. I need to see how Derek Carr plays, if he can kind of bounce back from his pretty down season last year. But I think right now, being one of the top teams in the B tier fits them nicely. And we'll see how they kind of address their needs in the draft and later in free agency. The Giants are a really another interesting team, but I am for right now going to place them in the B tier ahead of the Vikings, but I am going to have them slightly behind the Browns and the Saints. They didn't really make a ton of moves this offseason. I know they went out and got Darren Waller. That was a great addition, but they still need a lot of help on the outside. They do not have great wide receivers. Their offensive line is still spotty in the interior. They need help at center. And their defense last year was solid. They have some really nice young players on that unit. But again, they still need some depth on their defensive line. They need a couple of starters in the secondary. So there are some big questions with them. I think last year they overachieved. This year, I think they're going to kind of result to the mean a little bit. I think they got a little bit lucky playing the Vikings last year, who I do not see as a super great team. And I think that playoff win is really what has generated a lot of hype for the Giants. I still think they're going to be a solid team next year. I can see them making the wild card again. But seeing them as a team that can win a playoff game next year or a lock to make the playoffs, I think is a little bit of a stretch for me at this point. So I think right now this is a good spot for them heading into the season. Another NFC East team, and it is the Philadelphia Eagles, and I'm going to have them just ahead of the Dolphins and the Cowboys, but it is very, very close to me. I don't think the Eagles are S-tier team anymore. They lost a lot of starters in free agency. They lost their Pro Bowl running back. They lost an offensive lineman. They lost Hargrave on their defense. They lost CJ Gardner-Johnson. I mean, the list goes on and on and on of people that they lost this offseason. Yes, they do have some good capital in the draft to recoup some of those players, but how effective are the rookies going to be in year number one? I think the Eagles take a slight step back, but the NFC is so weak. They're still going to be one of the best teams in that conference. That's the reason why I almost wanted to put them in S tier, but when I really think about how I'm judging these teams, just not solely based off of where they're playing or the conference that they're in, but just as a team in general, I still think the Eagles are a really good team, can win multiple playoff games next year because of the talent on the roster and not just because of how weak of a conference that they're in. But when I'm looking at the cream of the crop of the NFL, I do not see the Eagles returning to that form next year. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe the rookies that they get will perform really nicely. They also lost both of their coordinators, so I think there are going to be some coaching disadvantages next year for them as well. So because of all that, I think they're going to be a really good team next year again, but not in the elite class of the NFL. The Pittsburgh Steelers are next. I'm going to have them ahead of the Giants, but again, behind the Browns. I think that's a really close matchup as well. The Browns and Steelers were very close last year, and now Kenny Pickett in year number 2. They just traded for Allen Robinson. They're going to have some good weapons to help out a young quarterback. Najee Harris, Deontay Johnson, George Pickens. Mike Tomlin has never had a losing season in his entire career, so you have to expect that the Steelers are not going to have a losing season again next year. They're going to be in the thick of it for a wild card spot because they are every single year. I do think the Lions and the Jets are a pretty good amount better than them, but I do think the Steelers are around where the Saints and Browns are at. I just kind of view the Steelers and the Browns in the same lens, but the fact that the Browns have Deshaun Watson, who could return to maybe his MVP caliber, which he was performing at just a couple seasons ago with the Texans, I think they have a higher ceiling, which is why I give them a slight edge over the Steelers. But it is really close. So I do think this is a good spot for the Steelers to be ahead of teams like the Giants and the Vikings, but be just a tiny bit behind their division rival in the Browns. The Denver Broncos, I think, are another B tier team. I'm going to have them slightly ahead of the Giants, but behind the Browns and the Steelers. I think the Broncos are going to be a lot better than they were last year when they were one of the worst teams in the league. I want to see how Sean Payton utilizes Russell Wilson. Can he get him back on track? Get him back to playing as good as football as he was for the Seattle Seahawks. They got some good pieces on both sides of the ball. I'm a little bit worried about their defense and their depth that they have on their defensive line, the linebacking unit, and the secondary. I'm not too concerned. Justin Simmons, P2, and Patrick Surtain. So I think they're going to be a solid team next year, but I am a little bit concerned about Russell Wilson. Can Sean Payton get the most out of him if he can? Hey, maybe the Broncos can be in the tier with like the Jets and the Lions. I do not see them as an A-tier team, though. I think they are going to need some time to get things going, get some chemistry going with Sean Payton and the rest of the roster. And they still need some help on their offensive line. They need some help on various positions on their defense. So the Broncos are a solid team. They do not have a lot of capital to improve the roster furthermore in the draft, but we'll see how they can perform next season. And I think the Packers are in a similar mold to the Broncos. I'm going to place them in B tier ahead of the Vikings, which may seem like a little bit of a hot take because the Packers are getting rid of Aaron Rodgers. Jordan Love, who we have not seen a lot of, is going to start as their quarterback 1 next year. But overall, if you compare the talent on both of these rosters, I do think the Packers have more overall talent. Really, the only question mark with this team now is their quarterback position. I know they started kind of slow last year. Things kind of derailed their season. They needed some more help on the outside with wide receivers. But I think year number 2 with Christian Watson, Romeo Doubs coming back from injury, year number 2 for him as well. And then they still have a first-round pick right in the middle of the first round. Maybe they go after Dalton Kincaid, the best receiving tight end in the class. Maybe they go after a wide receiver, the first one that they've drafted in the first round in what feels like, 2 decades now. Ultimately, I see the Packers as a solid team next year who could be competing for the NFC North with the Vikings and the Lions down the stretch. I don't see them winning it, but I do think down the stretch, maybe in December, early January, they are in the mix, but I think that kind of represents where I have them in this ranking. And now we find ourselves with the Carolina Panthers, who had the number 1 overall pick in the 2023 NFL Draft and are going to be selecting Bryce Young. I honestly think the Panthers are probably the top C-tier team thus far. I think over the Raiders, Commanders, Bucks, Falcons, and Bears, I think overall their talent on their roster is pretty much better than all those teams, if not on par with them. And then I think when you combine the coaching with Frank Reich and the amazing staff he built to those other teams, combined with their defensive talent, and of course, they still have a pretty decent offensive line, a good duo of tackles. I like the acquisition of Miles Sanders at running back, Pro Bowler last year. He could be pretty solid for a young rookie quarterback, but I still think they have a lot to do as far as weaponry. They did get rid of DJ Moore, really their only viable target from just a season ago. So they're going to have to do something in the draft. Maybe they draft a guy in the 2nd or 3rd round to be kind of their new look wide receiver. We'll have to see how all that plays out, but people kind of forget that the Panthers were really 1 game away from making the playoffs last year. They had that Week 17 game against the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, which was practically a playoff game. So they were that close to being the top team in the NFC South just a year ago. Now Tom Brady is gone. They got a new head coach coach who's pretty competent compared to Matt Rule, who started the season for them last year. I think the Panthers are a solid team. I think they have a chance to compete in the NFC South. I think ultimately the Saints edge them out, though, to win that division. But as far as being the number 2 team in that division, I can definitely see that next year. All kind of depends on how Bryce Young plays and if he's ready to start right away. But if he plays pretty good football and he can stay healthy, I definitely can see the Panthers as another 7-8 win team next season. Now, the Arizona Cardinals, in my opinion, are going to be the worst team in the league next season. There's been so much drama with them. Now that Kyler Murray is injured, he's going to miss at least probably the first few weeks of the season. D-Hop is probably going to get traded. J.J. Watt retired. Budda Baker now wants to be traded. So really all the core players on that team are either not able to play or have retired or want to be off the team. They want to be traded away. There's not much talent outside of, really that core collection of players. They have a new head coach in Jonathan Gannon. I just do not see things going well for them next season. And I could definitely see them kind of having a similar season to the Bears where, hey, maybe they already have their quarterback of the future, but they end up with the first overall pick in the draft, trade down, kind of use those picks to help rebuild their team. But yeah, I'm really, really low on the Cardinals. I definitely see them being one of the worst teams next season, no doubt in my mind. And that brings us to another team that's on the complete other end of that spectrum in the Buffalo Bills. They are an S-tier team. I still think they're going to be one of the elite teams in the league next year. I would have them behind the 49ers, Bengals, and Chiefs going into the year, though. I think those teams have proven just to be a little bit more successful in the playoffs, and I just trust them a little bit more when we get to January football. They still have a top 3 quarterback in Josh Allen. They have a good collection of players. Von Miller will be coming back from his ACL injury. It's relatively the same coaching staff. I know they lost their defensive coordinator, Leslie Frazier. He retired. I will say, though, that the Dolphins and the Jets are making a ton of moves to really catch up to them, and I think this could be a really interesting year in the AFC East. I think until proven otherwise, the Bills still have to be kind of the favorite in that division because they have won it the past few seasons. But would I be surprised if the Dolphins or the Jets push the Bills and overtake the division next year? No, I wouldn't. But regardless of that, even if the Bills didn't win the division, I still see them being a very good team and maybe one of the better wildcard teams that we've seen in the recent years. The Seattle Seahawks really overachieved last year, but I still think they are a B-tier team. I'm going to put them right between the Titans and the Vikings. I think overall, I trust them more than the Titans. Geno Smith had a huge resurgence last year. He's on the upward trend. We'll see if he can continue that for a second year in a row. They got a lot of really good production out of the rookie class. Can the rookie class continue to grow, take another step in year number 2? And of course, they still have a lot of premium picks in this year's draft. Can they even get more players like they had last year, draft really well again? The Seahawks could be a really nice, young, up-and-coming team. And I think next year, again, they're going to be in the fight for a wild card, which is why I think relatively in the thick of things in the B tier is pretty much where they belong. But the last team I have to rank is the New England Patriots, and I'm actually going to put them in C tier right behind the Raiders and ahead of the Washington Commanders. The Patriots still have Bill Belichick. That's the reason why I even have them this high on the C tier list. But as far as their talent on the roster, the Patriots really have a lot of holes, a lot of flaws. They have not done a good job in free agency or the draft in the past few seasons to kind of bolster up that team since Tom Brady has left. I'm not a huge fan of Mac Jones, but I think getting an offensive coordinator, a real offensive coordinator, should help him out. I think he should be a little bit better this year than he was this past year. But when I just even look at their division with the Dolphins, Jets, and Bills, the overall talent between all 4 of those teams, the disparity between the Patriots and those other 3 teams is just pretty crazy to me. I don't think it's any debate that the Patriots have the least amount of talent in that entire division. Personally, I'm just not going to prop up the Patriots because of Bill Belichick's greatness. I just think they're around a C tier team. Maybe somebody could argue me into having them as a lower B tier team. But besides that, I cannot put the Patriots any higher than that. I do not see them making the playoffs. I definitely don't see them winning a playoff game. So yeah, I'm just not too high on the Patriots. I think the Raiders just have a lot more playmaking ability than them, which is why I would have the Raiders with a slight edge over the Patriots. Obviously, the Patriots have a better coach. Obviously, they're going to have a better defense than the Raiders. But as far as playing in this current day NFL, you really need to have a lot of playmakers. I think the Raiders have that. I know the Patriots do not have that. So I think right now it is fair to have the Raiders just slightly ahead of the Patriots as we're heading into the draft. But this is my official NFL tier list heading into the 2023 NFL draft. Let me know if you agree with my list or what you would change, and also if you like where I had your team. Also, if you are new to the channel, be sure to subscribe. Drop a like on the video if you did enjoy it. But thank you guys so much for watching the video. I will catch you guys in my next upload. More NFL content is on the way.